Okay, good afternoon, and welcome to our second Cal's Conversation Quarantine Edition. I'm Will Reese with Next Level Sports and the Director of the Collegiate Athletic Leadership Symposium. Welcome back to those who joined us last week for our conversation with Joe Castiglione and Rem Baker. And for our first timers, we're glad to have you here and excited about another great panel today. We're fired up to have over 400 people registered for today's webinar and look forward to hearing from a few of the best ADs in the country on how they're leading through these unprecedented times. Before we get started, I just wanted to talk briefly about what we've got coming up next week. At CALS, we're all about creating opportunities for people to develop and connect. Our event every October is by invitation and tends to skew towards the highest levels of senior management with large groups of ADs as well as those who aspire to be ADs and are getting really close to achieving that goal. So I'm happy to announce that we've developed a unique experience for next week that we're calling The Path. This will be an interactive session geared towards connecting senior level leaders with up-and-coming administrators. This is specifically built for folks who are closer to the mid-level positions, who are motivated to continue to advance in their careers, possibly with the goal of becoming an AD, but have a few more steps to make before they're in that position. This will consist of a group of 25 or less participants being placed in a Zoom breakout session with 2 senior leaders. These will be high-level deputy ADs and senior associate ADs. Here, a few examples are on your screen now. This group will include our moderator today, Eric Wood. And these breakout group leaders will discuss their path to their current positions and the lessons they've learned along the way. This will be, as opposed to the webinar that we're doing now, this will be the Zoom with all the faces on the screen, so lots of time for interaction and the ability to connect, and we're going to keep those groups smaller so you'll be able to do that. We've already got around 20 leaders committed to being a part of this session next week, and look forward to having adding great value for the participants. There will definitely be limited space so keep your eye out on Twitter tomorrow and for an email to register for that, which will be next Thursday. Moving on to our panel, first of all, a big thank you to all these leaders for being with us today. I realize I've talked to so many athletic directors who feel like they're busier now than ever and feel like they're on Zoom from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed. So really appreciate you all being with us, and also appreciate everybody that's on the call and participating today, that you're carving out some time to continue to learn and get better during this time period. Eric's going to introduce our panel, but real quick, I just wanted to say thank you for Desiree with being us. Desiree was with us at CALS in Denton this week, or this last fall for the first time, and she walked away with the unofficial Rookie of the Year title from CALS 2019, and she was a great value, and we appreciate her being with us. Heather Lyke is one of my favorite people in college athletics, and she's been with us our last 5 CALs and hosted us during her first year at Pittsburgh in 2018. And then, of course, we've got the godfather of CALs, Bubba Cunningham. Bubba hosted us in 2011 and in Tulsa in 2011 in our inaugural event, and in Chapel Hill in 2012. If you are on this call now and you've had a great experience with CALs, if you've met somebody or learned something that's really advanced your career, or if you've gotten anything off of being with us last week on this CALs conversation, the only reason that's happened is because Bubba said yes when I went and talked to him about this event in 2011. And so from that point to this last decade, we've had right around 1,000 people participate in the last 9 CALs, and half of that number have been to more than one. So this community created through this event has really changed my life, and Bubba's belief in people is an inspiration to me, and will always appreciate him for saying yes. And I don't know that I don't think at the time he realized that he would have something on his calendar every October from that day forward. So at this point, I'm excited to hand it over to our moderator and a great member of our CALS community, Eric Wood, Deputy Director of Athletics at University of Central Florida. Take it away, Eric.
Well, thank you. And to our panelists, I'm excited. I've been looking forward to this, since the last week. And when I found out that you all would be a part of this esteemed panel. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you and learning from you for our participants and colleagues on the call. Again, Eric Wood, Deputy AD at UCF, and thrilled to be here and get started. Bubba, I don't know, right off the bat, I've heard a reference of Godfather and veteran. Are they calling you old?
Exactly. That's exactly. It's a nice way of saying that. Very old. Got the gray hair, the long gray hair to prove it. We need to get the barbershops open.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm my own barber, Bubba, but I hear you. I hear you. Hey, for our colleagues, before I introduce our guests, just letting you know that with the amount of people, with over 400 people on this webinar, the chat portion has been disabled. As well as the raise hand feature, but the Q&A is open. So feel free to do that. Will and I will be monitoring those questions. Just wanted you to know that the chat is disabled. The raise hand feature is also disabled, but the Q&A is open. So without further ado, just let me go ahead and introduce our esteemed panel. Bubba Cunningham, as you've heard from already, is the Director of Athletics at the University of North Carolina and has been since 2011. 18th year, 19th year, Bubba, as an AD. That sound about right?
All right.
All right, 18, 19 years as an AD. Prior to his time in North Carolina, was the athletic director at Tulsa, and recently learned in preparation for this, the AD at Ball State. So Bubba, thank you for making time for us this afternoon.
Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure to be on. And Will, I do, college athletics is, so kind of family oriented. The relationships that you make in this profession are unlike any other, I believe. And Will, you started this with your family. And I'm sorry Forrest isn't on here because he's always a favorite for everybody. But with Christy and behind you and all the effort, with Laura behind you and all the effort to make this thing go for the 10 or 11 years that or 8 or 9 now that it's been going, it's fantastic. So I appreciate the way you've gotten this thing started, because you have connected an awful lot of people, and it really does feel like a family operation. So congrats to Will.
Okay, thank you, Bubba. And next up is Heather Lyke, Director of Athletics at Pitt since 2017. Hey, Heather, how are you?
Oh, great.
Good, good. Heather, again, has been the AD since 2017 at Pitt after serving as the Director of Athletics at Eastern Michigan. On the NACDA Executive Committee, lead one board of directors. She does it all. Heather, thank you for joining us today. Look forward to learning from you as well.
No, honored to be here. Bubba, you said it as well as you could. And I would just add that the reason why the best thing that I found at Cal's, coming to my very first one, was, NACDA's, wonderful and great and big, but Cal's is more intimate. And it's just a place where you can actually build real relationships and have, I think very genuine, real conversations. So hopefully we can do that a little bit today virtually, but the in-person connections at Cal's are invaluable.
Thank you, Heather. And last but not least, Desiree Reed-Francois. Desiree, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. And thank you to those 400 people who are spending time with us. I know that we're all averaging like 8 hours a day on Zoom, and the last thing you want to do is be on another call. So thank you, and thank you to Will. Last year was my first time at Cal's. I had been hearing about it for years, and wow, blown away at the level and the depth of information. And Heather and Bubba mentioned it. Relationships. This whole business is built on relationships, and that was a wonderful opportunity to really check in with colleagues and spend time with one another and really learn from the experts in the room. So I'm looking forward to the next hour or so.
Desiree, thank you. And to complete her bio there, Director of Athletics at UNLV since 2017. Prior to that, the Deputy Athletic Director at Virginia Tech, approaching 25 years in the business, at least what I could count, Desiree, on the bio. So thank you for being here. Desiree and I also chosen to do this webinar from our home, so we had to address our kids before everything got started. Bubba and Heather got it right. They went straight to the office. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Really do appreciate your time. I would be remiss. We know the topic of this webinar is essentially leadership through COVID-19, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask for one of you to comment on yesterday's information coming from the board of directors as it relates to name, image, and likeness. So let me open up the floor. Maybe, you know, Bubba, I'll start with you. And any initial thoughts related to NIL?
Well, I have to admit, I'm struggling with it. You know, if the legislation goes through as outlined by the committee, I think it dramatically changes college athletics. I think it actually is more permissive, if that's possible, than professional sports. If you have access to agents, you have access to school, you have 100% access to your name, image, and likeness. You can transfer basically whenever you want. You don't have a contract that will keep you in one place. You don't have a draft. You can be influenced in the recruiting process. If we can't create some guardrails around that, which quite frankly, as it relates to recruiting, no one has ever tried to create guardrails around recruiting when you have a wide open market for name, image, and likeness. While I don't think it'll dramatically impact college athletics in the first year or two, over time, it will. There's only a handful of people that can play professional athletics. There's only, every time you go from high school sports to college sports to Division I to pro, there's fewer people that can compete at that level. There's fewer people that have a really significant market value. And what we have done in college athletics is generated a lot of money from a lot of different sources to provide opportunities for many to compete. This is taking the resources and shifting it to those who can create it. It's just a different model. It's a fine model. I mean, it's worked for generations for multiple sports. It's just not as comprehensive or as inclusive as college athletics. So we have a lot of work to do to get to some legislation that I can support prior to January of 21.
Thank you for that, Bubba. Desiree, Heather, I picked up my phone this morning and there it was on the ticker, and just comment after comment after comment. Anything you want to add to that?
You know, Bubba's excellent summary, honestly. You know, I think we have to shift our mindset in the sense of being, you know, I've heard the word liberalized, you know, it's extremely liberal perspective. Even with trying to shift, I have the same trepidation, I would say, that Bubba shares. You know, I think some of the concepts are, you know, were fully supported by the group. Some of the concepts were divided, is our understanding as we've learned quite a bit about this so far. And I think they're tossing them out there for, you know, what is our reaction? What is the realistic impact of these types of things? What are all the unintended consequences that come along with it? You know, I concur that there's going to be a whole lot of work, that we've got to get these things, you know, we've got to really dive in and focus and not, you know, pass things just to get things done, but to really understand its impact. And there's a lot of tentacles to each one of the individual concepts.
Thank you, Heather. Desiree?
I would concur with both of my colleagues' statements in that the guardrail piece is going to be critical.
Yeah.
We have to, going through that process, and the theory I love. Any opportunity we can to provide more for our student athletes, we want to be able to do. They're the reason why we do what we do. But those guardrails and looking at what that process looks like and figuring out those details, that's going to be the important part. And there's a lot of work left to do. But you know what? My goodness, we're going through a global pandemic right now. I think we can figure this part out.
All right. Well said. Well said. Well, thank you for those, and thank you for being flexible. Clearly, that was off topic, but you know, I imagine it's on everybody's minds, and it was in everybody's email inbox. So I figured we go ahead and address that right off the bat. So shifting back over to leadership through COVID-19, share with your colleagues, share with our friends in the industry. how have you personally been holding up during this pandemic, and maybe an activity or something new you've picked up during quarantining? So let's start with Desiree. Why don't you take it, Desiree?
Well, there are wonderful silver linings, but I must admit, I thought I was sort of technologically savvy, and that first couple weeks, even now, let me just be real. Before we started this whole Zoom call, I was shrieking at my 15-year-old son to get off the internet because it's going too slow and blah, 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 blah. And I have a wonderful, amazing team at UNLV. And I really did think I was very tech savvy until this hit. And I had to learn all these new channels. And fortunately, Megan Caligari on my team, she holds my hand and she's like, no, Slack is different than Zoom. And yes, it's different than email. And okay, let's just take it down a notch. So I think the silver lining is that I'm learning a lot more about technology. I never really was a big fan of remote work. And maybe that's my issue, and that I wasn't probably as trusting. I really take a lot of value in the water cooler conversations, and I like to see people, to read the body language. But now I've come around. I see some beauty and some benefits to people that are working remotely. So there have been some wonderful silver linings. And in terms of interesting things that we've done, so the Las Vegas Strip is really quiet right now. My 15-and-a-half-year-old is learning how to drive, and he's like, Mom, can I drive down the Vegas Strip? And I'm like, well, okay. So we did that, and that was a lot of fun. We didn't kill anyone, so it was good.
Sounds good. Heather, how are you personally holding up? Any new quarantining activities you've picked up?
Well, I think we're all adjusting and adapting. I can't lie, like say, oh yeah, this is great. I think I live with quarantines in my household, so they're keeping us busy. But I think the biggest challenge is the parts of the job that we like the most. I mean, personally, that I like the most are the relationships and the connections and seeing people and going to events. And if you feed off of those things, if that's one of the reasons why you do what you do, that's a big part that's missing. So we're still working. I think our teams are all doing everything that they possibly can to stay connected. But I would say the real pleasure in the job and the things that you enjoy most are a bit missing, honestly. I mean, that's how I see it. And I'm looking for my hairdresser to open up as well, Bubba. There are a lot of Starbucks in Pittsburgh, and there are 2 left. And so, I have to drive like 15 minutes north to get my drink. And so that's not working out so well. It's kind of putting a cramp in my normal style. So on the light side of things, quarantining, I'm running every morning. But the good thing is my daughters are joining me, which is making it a lot of fun. And that's a new, I didn't think they would get up early with me, but so they're pushing me a little bit faster than I'm normally going, which is a good thing. So it's been, we ordered a pickleball net, so we're playing pickleball in the driveway because you can't do much, so I'm getting really good.
That sounds good. Thank you for sharing that. Bubba, you considered essential personnel there, or are you able to pick up a hobby during this thing?
I'm trying to consider myself. That's why I'm coming into the office. I want my boss to make sure he sees every once in a while that I do show up. But I'm doing the same thing that everybody else is. I've had peaks and valleys. You guys are much more disciplined than I am. But the very first weekend we were quarantined, they had shut down our golf courses, so I went and played golf. And then a friend of mine, another AD in the league, he texted me and said, "Hey, what'd you do?" I said, "Well, I went and played golf." He said, "Well, I cleaned the garage." And I said, "Well, my wife's out of town. Apparently yours is home." So the second week, I had to clean out the garage. I had to clean out my closet. But I haven't done as many of those things lately, as I think we're all getting tired of that. But I think for Heather and for Desiree, you've got younger kids than I do. Instead of being on Zoom, I think I'd like to see you guys on TikTok. I think
Oh,
you
yeah.
guys would really be good. And I think that the rest of the ADs would like to see a little more spirit coming out of you two.
That's right. That's right. I'm
We'll
concerned
do
when
right
I get
after we
home.
see you dance.
We also have, we've been having, and one thing we have learned, and you guys hit a nail on the head, you like to be able to go down the hall and say hello to somebody and talk to them. And then you really kind of learn what's going on within the department. So we did have the coaches, actually it was an all staff call. And we had all of our coaches on there, and I had asked one of our coaches to speak to the group while he was on, and he was phenomenal. He was talking about what they were doing at home. He and his daughters are trying to learn how to play the piano. Joe Bresci is actually who it was, Heather. So for our lacrosse coach, who Heather worked with at Ohio State,
Yeah.
they're raising 6 ducklings, teaching each other how to play the piano. He has total gray hair. And the entire time he was speaking, he had a hat on. And he said, and my kids had never seen me with dark hair. He takes his hat off. He dyed his hair black. It was absolutely spectacular.
Oh,
So
my gosh.
trying to be engaged and work with your family and trying to do all your work stuff during the day. One thing I have found is at the end of the day, after doing all these Zoom calls, I think I'm more tired than if I were going to games and staying on campus for another 6 or 7 hours, enjoying the kids' activities. So anyhow, it's fun, but we're ready to get back to work.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I wanted, just to let everybody know, so let them see the human side of you guys that are sitting in the chair. But let me transition to this. Bubba, while I have you, let's keep going on this one. Over your 30 plus years, 18 as an AD, where does managing the COVID-19 pandemic rank amongst the other crises maybe you've had to manage through?
Well, it's certainly the most unique, or I guess you can't be the most unique. You're either unique or you're not. So I guess it is unique in that we've had other crises. I was an assistant AD during 9/11. And when the planes hit the towers, everybody got together and you had this sense of community. You either prayed or you spoke and you gathered and talked about your mutual feelings about what occurred. In this one, it's the absolute opposite. You have this pandemic and everyone has concern and worry and anxiety, but they all ask you to separate. And so it's hard to build a sense of community. Thankfully, it's 2020, and we do have some technology that we can do this. It's not nearly what it would be if we were all in the same room having a conversation, but technology has helped in trying to express feelings, communicate, understand, what needs to be done. I really, I'm 50 some odd years old, and it's hard for me. For an 18 to 22-year-old or somebody younger to try to navigate through those feelings in this environment is a challenge. So communication, over communication, I think is something that I really learned the value of even more than I thought I understood prior to this. And hopefully we can continue that on because I think it's a great value to embrace.
Thanks, Bo. Desiree, I'll kick this one to you, right? Because we go from a guy that's been sitting in the chair for 18 years to the first go around for you. You had to say, you had to be thinking to yourself, unbelievable, my first time going through this thing. So what's that been like for you in your career?
Oh, I was hired, it's been year 3, or I'm about to start year 4 actually. And on October 1, we had the largest mass shooting in Las Vegas, and I had been the athletic director at UNLV for all of about 4 months. Many of the emotions and the process from the triage phase to the operationalizing the mission to the recovery was very similar, although after October 1, it was a much more contracted period than what we have right now. But the phases of a crisis were very similar. So we've been through that before in our community and our athletic department. And so we knew the importance of acting with even greater compassion, over communicating and being very disciplined in the communication. We knew that there would be stages of grief And so our athletic department, because we had been through October 1, there was some familiarity. What's incredibly different now, though, is how global it was, how global it is, and there's so many unknowns. With October 1, there was a beginning and an end. The recovery and the emotional recovery, it's still with us today, but there were some similarities. So, but like I said, the acting with empathy and being very deliberate in engaging people has been incredibly critical. And just a recognition that everybody suffers in a different way. Some of us are inherently internally focused. Some of us are a little bit more quiet. Some of us really need people. And also we have some staff members whose families are across the country right now and they're by themselves. And so we've been trying to be very intentional and very deliberate in engaging our staff as well as our coaches and our student athletes.
Thanks, Desiree. Appreciate that. Heather, where does this rank for you in terms of complexity over your career?
Well, I think this is obviously the most significant crisis because it is so global. It is a healthcare crisis. It's an economic crisis. It has multiple impacts, in so many different ways. And I think that there's two things that kind of stick out to me. One is, kind of as a leader, and what we all typically do is, there's the mountain, let's all go climb it. You set the direction as a leader of your organization or your team or your department or division. And so now, we know where the mountain is. Sorry, my light went out. We know where the mountain is. Got to move around in my office. But we don't know how to, there's just the unknown factor. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. We're, inherently planners, inherently structured and routine oriented as individuals and probably as leaders. And so that piece of it makes it uneasy, I guess, mentally. So that's one of the biggest challenges. And then the second thing is, I honestly have empathy for us as adults, but frankly, we're working. I mean, we're adults. You're working, you're doing what you can. I have the most empathy for the student athletes because, and young people and kids today, because you can't recapture the moments that they are losing right now. I mean, we lose 2 months of work, or 3 months of actual work in the office and sort of thing. But we didn't lose a senior season. We didn't lose what it's like to go to college in my sophomore year. We didn't lose dating opportunities. We didn't, I just don't know what, how you're socializing, and I see my kids, they're not playing their sports or doing their activities or performing in a show or something. And you can't recapture that. I mean, you really can't. I mean, it's lost. And so as young people, I just think that volatility that they've had to go through, and the good thing is I think young people adapt better than adults. We're more creatures of habit. It's probably just innate by being older, but they do adapt. But it's not, I don't want to say it's not fair to them, but they've had to adapt at a time when they probably some of them were, no one was ready for what some people have equivalated it to a career-ending injury. All of a sudden, the whole team had a career-ending injury. Your whole club team, your whole high school team, your whole college team, all the NBA team, the professional league. So it's a big adjustment for young people, I think.
Heather, that's a perfect segue as we're figuring out how to manage all this. Let's. I don't know about you, but we were sitting here on our campus and something will come out on Twitter. Something would come out from campus, the NCAA, the White House, right? There continues, this pandemic will require multi-level communication. How are you managing that internally and externally? There might be the tweet that comes out from the NCAA, might be the tweet that comes out from your housing office that you weren't prepared for. And then your coaches are texting you because their kids are texting you about what they just received via email. So I guess where I'm getting at is just how are you managing the different levels of messaging that are coming out related to the pandemic? And I'll start with Desiree.
Again, deliberate communication has been critically important. When this whole thing started, like we were in this triage mode, right? And then and we wanted to make sure all of our student athletes were safe. So we had our coaches reached out to our student athletes, and then every single one of our senior staff members called every single student athlete. It was important to me that our students heard from not only their coach, but also from an administrator. So we did that, we ensured that they were safe, and then it came to operationalizing the mission. When we operationalized the mission though, we had to do it with much more deliberate communication and much more empathy. We set up our structure, if you will. I learned about technology. And then now we're getting on to our recovery plans and working through that. But there are times when you're working in an organization where you love collaboration and you really want to build consensus and you want to spend a lot of time with the why. But there are also times when you have to consult and decide and be very nimble. Our mantra has been to adapt and adjust, and that's what we're doing. Our student athletes, and 63% of our staff members are former student athletes, and of our first 50 hires. But we all have a love of sports, or we wouldn't do what we do. And I have never been a part of a game or a regatta or a match where everything has gone how it's supposed to. And nothing will. But that's what makes the beauty in athletics, is that we adjust, and we know how to do that. And we know how to, and our student athletes Heather touched on it, our student athletes are so incredibly resilient. And so our staff, we had to adjust, and that's what we're doing. And we also had to have the compassion that we're going to make some mistakes, but we're going to be we're going to have high empathy, and we're going to over communicate and just do our best.
Yeah. Heather, I was sitting as a participant on this call with Josie and Ren last week. From that time, we have 14 states roughly open back up. Honestly, 6 yesterday, including ours in a phase 1. I mean, how are you now? How do you react to that? You probably had a good plan in place. It was quiet for a little while, and now your different states opening back up. How are you communicating with student athletes and coaches and staff?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the things that is incredibly important is, the alignment of leadership within your organization, knowing what is happening. The beauty of this is we're all probably communicating. This is where I struggle. Like, we're talking a lot more. I like to do. So we're talking about things, but the reality is we're in communication a lot more frequently. And so, I think from our chancellor on down, being in, weekly calls with the senior cabinet and understanding the, much more big picture perspective that the chancellor and others are dealing with, and understanding how our government is going to manage this situation, and then trying to be as transparent with your staff as possible. And so, I think that there's great value in the transparency right now, because you can only share we're sharing what we know, because people are hungry for, just definitive information. And we did do a virtual all staff meeting. I was hesitant at first. I thought, okay, how are we going to feel connected? But interestingly, we had, 246 people on, and we have 248 employees. So think about the breadth of people that you were able to connect with. And I just tried to be as transparent as possible and share everything that I had heard from above, to give, some direction on, what we know really definitively economically, and then what we know in the task forces that we're developing in our athletic department to move forward. But eventually we have to, we are having to move forward. That's the reality. The vaccine is not going to be here for 2 years. So we're going to have to learn to manage. And, and that's one of the other messages and lessons I learned from my chancellor right out of the gate is, he said, Heather, people are going to have to learn how to work differently, right? Because we're not all together. and you got to trust some people working remotely, but you also have to learn to manage and lead differently. It's not going to be the same situation as you're used to. And I think, so I think that that's been critically important in the back of my head. How do I manage and lead differently when you don't get to connect as frequently as you can in person?
Yeah. Thanks, Heather. Bubba, what's the biggest concern that you're hearing from student athletes or coaches, whether that was through your SAC reps or, you know, you're having a head coach's town hall or, you know, department meeting? What are the biggest concerns that are coming out of those two groups?
Well, the biggest concern our coaches have are the student athletes, and how are we trying to take care of the student athletes when they're away? And, you know, I give a ton of credit to our faculty. You know, within, you know, a 10 days period, we had to go from in-classroom education to online. And if you'd have told our faculty, you've got 3 years to do that, they would have taken 4.5. But in this pandemic, we said you have 10 days, and my gosh, they did a wonderful job doing it, got it turned around. Our academic support program was the first group that had to learn how to deliver their services electronically, virtually as well. And they've done a marvelous job with that. So the number one concern, as everybody has stated here, are the student athletes, and that's particularly where the coach's mind is. And now, so what are we going to do for summer school? We're going to be remote during the summer. We do have scholarships, so can we pay for room and board? Can we pay cost of attendance? So we're working through those financial implications and how we're going to try to accommodate our students. You know, a number of our student athletes are on Pell Grants, so do we treat those students differently than the other folks? We have a handful that are on campus, some that are not. And so it really takes a lot of planning and coordination to be fair and equitable. We'd love to provide all things to everyone, but we can't do that while they're here. And we don't know what the financial future is based on what games we'll be allowed to play in the fall and what type of attendance will we have. And that's the economic engine that we have. We don't have a ton of reserves that we can call upon to bail ourselves out. We're definitely paycheck to paycheck, so to speak, in Carolina. We don't have a reserve, so we have to balance the budget each year. So I can't make big long-term financial commitments, and so we'll just do the best we can to take care of our students. The other group that's been really engaged are our psychologists. We do have a really good program. We don't have nearly enough. We have 2 full-time psychologists. We just got our second one this year. But the number of calls that they get is incredible. I also am in touch with the campus, you know, CAPS, our Campus Psychological Services group as well, and they're overwhelmed with calls. So there is a lot of anxiety with our student athletes and with our staff, and trying to work with each of them to make sure that they feel comfortable, feel supported, and have to start thinking about coming back to work. Because as you mentioned, with everything opening up, we're going to have to get ready for that very, very soon.
Thanks, Bubba. Desiree, Heather, let's go Desiree on that one there. Biggest concern that you're hearing from your coaches and student athletes?
You know, I've been really proud of our coaches and our student athletes and their resiliency. Our coaches have really come together. We're all facing budget challenges, and to a coach, every single one said, how can I help? What do I need to do? Let's all suffer together. Basically, they didn't say suffer necessarily. That's more my editorializing. But I think the lack of certainty, we're all in athletics, right? We're all planners, and we all and we're also very seasonal if you think about it, right? This is April. This is the month when we're gearing up for College World Series and, you know, basketball recruiting. And this is, you know, we're almost to May, and then we get to the end of the school year, and then June is a little quieter. So this is we're very cyclical. And so now all of a sudden, this is such a big shift for many of us who like a very formulaic, very planned life. And so the uncertainty, we're just having to adjust, and it is what it is. My student athletes, we check in each week with them, and I have noticed that the energy is not where it was week 3. And so every week we're trying to do something different. whether it's bringing in a baseball player from the Dodgers, and I'm a Giants fan, so I don't remember the name of the Dodgers player, or we're bringing in Andre Agassi, or just bringing in different speakers to kind of keep our student athletes engaged. We're going to do a virtual barbecue. We're just trying to be creative. And one of the silver linings that I have found throughout this whole pandemic is, and I'm sure everybody on this call has stepped up and achieved more than they thought they could do. And I bet they're incredibly proud of their entire athletic department, because I have seen some absolute beautiful leadership. Like our compliance team is running it's a Rebel challenge, and it's a video challenge. And it's just been wonderful to see people step outside their comfort zone and just care a little more for one another.
Yeah, thanks. I want to, Heather, for the sake of time, and Bubba had mentioned, thank you for sharing that, Desiree. Bubba had mentioned the economic engine. So let's jump into football, okay? And Bubba and Heather, for now, I'm going to direct these toward you, and then give Desiree a chance to grab a sip of water. But assuming, Danny has told us until somebody tells me different, we're planning for football season to start, right? So assuming all of you are planning for that, hopefully Bubba's not, because we open up with UNC, so hopefully they're not. But assuming everybody's planning to open up on game one until you're told differently, what broad plans are you making? What are going to be the determining factors for getting the green light to press forward? Obviously, there'll be communication from the different levels, but what broad plans are you making to be heading towards the opening of the college football season?
I would, one of our task force, we have an athletic department task force. We're trying to mirror what the university is doing and try to do some things in parallel and in concert with them. But, obviously we're focused on, return to work, all the HR issues, return to academics, practice and competition. So all the student athlete issues, and then return to hosting events. And on that side of things, it's a big undertaking, obviously, to analyze what would be different. Obviously we've got to have kids back on campus. We've got to be open and things to move forward. But there's some words I think that our external team is using that are, whether it's touchless, cashless, or contactless. So we've always wanted to go pure mobile ticketing. We're obviously going to go pure mobile ticketing. All the mobile concession opportunities, and we're shifting concessionaires this summer as well. So our food service contract on campus changed, and so that's a big undertaking. I think the reality of realizing that all these personal protection devices or implementations are going to be a part of our new normal, in the sense of whether that's just hand sanitizers, or the cleanliness of your facilities, or masks, or gloves, or seat wipes, or, all those sorts of things are being explored by, really our operational and external team to think creatively about what's going to make people and fans and people feel comfortable coming. What new efforts and steps are you all taking? And how are you communicating those to your fans with regards to our experience now in a crowded environment? I think what's awkward about it is, even today, you see people and you're like, you step back, at a grocery store or whatever. And, versus, you're going into a game with 80,000 people and it's, arm to arm, shoulder to shoulder, and you never thought twice about it. Right. But obviously that mindset has to shift. And so that's what we're trying to put our head around, that experience for our fans coming to games.
Thanks, Heather. Bubba, you comment on that?
Yeah, no, Heather hit it spot on. And, I could add a couple of things to it. I am sure that you guys are the same. If I had $1 for every solicitation I've gotten about a new product that's going to help me get going, I don't think we'd have to play football. It's unbelievable. Electrostatic this, electrostatic that, Clorox 360. I could spray down the entire United States with what this thing has been emailing me. And I have no idea what any of it means. And so I have no clue what that stuff is. But again, our facility staff is fantastic. And like Heather, they're tied in with the rest of campus and our emergency operations group. And they're really doing a great job, whether it's, the masks that people have to wear, gloves, the cleaning supplies, and Heather laid it out great. You know, it is a return to work. We're doing it staff, students, and public. And so what does that take? And then within those groups, you have different groups as well. We have some people that will come to work tomorrow, regardless of what condition they think the building is. Another group won't come unless they're guaranteed the whole place has been sanitized. Another group can't come to work because they either have kids or people that they're taking care of and can't get there. And others have a compromised health position and we wouldn't want them to come. So we're working through those. Then when you get here, everybody has a little bit different job. Our business office is in an office environment, but the strength coach or the trainer is one-on-one potential contact, human contact. So they're treated a little bit differently. Our academic support generally provides service across a desk. Now, when you go to a checkout and they've got the old sneeze guard up there, I don't want to put sneeze guards in our academic support unit, but those people have to be comfortable as well. So we're starting to work our way through what does a return to work look like. And I tell you, the folks have been absolutely fantastic. So that, I think Heather and Desiree would say the same thing. The best thing about being remote is you really understand how good your staff is. And I could not be more thankful for the group that I get to work with every day.
Thanks for that. We're going to take a break here for a second to go to a question. Feel free to use the question and answer feature. Bubba, this one was for you. Going forward into the future, what sort of things, this was from Chris Asa, going forward into the future, what sort of things do you see future ADs doing to create the financial reserves necessary for blunt impacts of a crisis like this?
Well, I do think that, the mentality for a long time in college athletics was if you generate it, you spend it. And I think we have to do a better job and build up reserves and have a little bit of a cushion should issues like this arise. You need more support than the general fund of the university. Hard to do that. It takes disciplined spending. It takes a lot of discipline to not spend everything you're generating. But for years, that's how college athletics has operated. And I just now have come to the realization you just can't do that going forward. And I really hope our CFO is not paying attention today.
Desiree, Bubba alluded to just some of the things he's learned, and Heather did as well, just watching their staffs kind of get out of their comfort zone a little bit and do things differently. But what do you see? What are some of the lessons that you've learned that will help us move forward as when we move on from the pandemic?
Well, I think everybody's touched on it, but same here. My team is just, I'm so proud of them, and I'm also just so thankful to get to work with such a talented group. And I know that UNLV is, well, I think we're unique, but I'm sure everybody on this call, it's been beautiful just seeing people step up and get outside their comfort zone and think about what truly matters, and that's our student athletes. So this, in terms of what we've learned how to prioritize. We've learned how to even refine, become even better under crisis. And we've learned, we've probably recalibrated our mission, if you will. And our mission really is education. And if we stick to that, we're going to be just fine. And we're going to get through this. And once we do, we'll look back and we'll think about what more we'll do after action and what happened. But I think we'll all probably be a little more technologically savvy.
So this is thank you for that, Desiree. This is for everyone. We'll go to Heather on this one, but many of us will be forced, or maybe you've had to do this already, to make some personnel and budget decisions, and the 10% here and looking at 15 and 20% models. But some of these are requiring layoffs and furloughs and decisions to support programs. I mean, I watched some institutions, some smaller private institutions that are just closing because in anticipation of the economic crisis. So, we see it on the news, we see it in the ticker every day. How are you handling those discussions, right? People are nervous. I know just some of the folks that work with me directly. Hey, what's Danny going to do? Are we getting cut? What's the university doing? So how are you addressing the staff to keep everybody focused on doing their job and not worrying so much about that piece? I'll start with Heather on that one.
Well, obviously these are really sensitive topics, right? I think what we've done is, try to be, again, as transparent as possible. The information, I think we need to all be like incredibly grateful for the jobs that we have and to continue to do them. And I've really tried to focus on like project-based work, people getting things done in this time. And there's great value in that. It's funny, Bubba sort of mentioned it, but I think we've always approached the financial model of college athletics as how do we generate more revenue? And that's been really a focus, like how do we get more money? How do we creative ways to generate revenue? And that is incredibly good, and we can all be creative. And I think that's a wise, generally a wise approach. You can't cut your way to success. It's challenging too, right? It's more appealing, I should say, instead of cutting, is to generate more revenue. But I do honestly think that at this time, we got to take a look at reasonable cost reductions that have gotten a little bit away from us all, probably. And realizing to be grateful for what we have, to analyze things that were, from a really financial standpoint, why are we feeding people? I just give an example, why are you feeding people before a game that they're working in the event? Just how much is too much? Or how do you have more controls? Or how do you consolidate resources? Or how do you manage these virtual calls while they don't have great value all the time? Whether it's a conference meeting, do you really have to go to your conference headquarters? Think of the amount of, not just the expense, but the time you spend traveling or going. Yes, you might want to go once a year. You don't need to go twice a year. Those types of things. I think you have to really look big picture at managing costs, because I think it got a little away from us all, I think ratchet up your budget controls and financial responsibilities in that way.
Thanks, Heather. Bubba, as it relates to your external staff, I'll say specifically the development officers and then maybe your sales and ticket sales folks. What's been the directive to them? Have your renewal timelines changed? How are you addressing that? How are you addressing your donors? Maybe, if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah, we have extended some deadlines, and obviously we're empathetic to our fan base who we're asking to buy tickets, and we're asking them to buy tickets and come to an environment that they're going to be uncomfortable in for some period of time. But we've done a couple of things. We've set up phone calls with our football coaches to do a Zoom call with season ticket holders. We've broken up our season ticket base, and they participated in those Zoom calls. The development staff has reached out to individual donors on a regular basis. We have had Zoom calls with different donor groups that are sport specifically interested. So we have our coach on and have that set of donors out there. So they've transitioned as well. They're trying to create some other content that they can shoot directly to the donors that keep them engaged with things that are going on, ideas that we have for the future. So they've done a really nice job of trying to keep the engagement as high as you can.
Desiree, anything creative that you're doing with your donors and your fan base to keep them engaged, keep them on board with you?
Sure. Similar to Bubba, we've taken the professional development and the opportunity these are so cost effective, these Zoom calls, and they're also time effective if you think about it. Instead of hosting a big luncheon that takes 6 hours to put on because of all the prep and setup and invitations, etc., you can host an intimate conversation with your football coach, with your basketball coach, with your tennis coach, and make it very specific and very targeted. We are opening up a $2 billion stadium in 4 months. So one thing that we've done and recognizing, we have a lot of seats to sell. And so what we did a $1 season ticket deposit, and it has been wildly successful. I think we sold like 1,600, we took 1,600 deposits within the first day and a half. And I think there's a conversion rate of about 65%. So, but the whole idea actually came from our general manager of our multimedia rights holder, because we held a brainstorming session during our senior staff meeting. And we said, everybody come with one great idea that you are going to own. And our Learfield GM, Dan Dolby, brought that idea. And the more we vetted it, the more we thought, that's really good. And so our marketing person, Carl, took it on and didn't cost us anything. And it gave us a wonderful interest list. So I love the creativity. That's definitely a silver lining of this entire time.
That's great, Desiree. And it's a perfect segue to the next sort of theme of the call that I was hoping to enter in. And it's sort of staying the course, right? You mentioned Allegiant Stadium, right? The project doesn't stop, or maybe there's some folks on the call that would say, actually, our projects are stopping, right? But how do you stay the course with that and you know, keep everybody going as it relates to your facilities projects, the academic success, as you mentioned? How are you doing that? Everybody's owning it, right? Owning a piece and moving forward, but talk to us about the facilities projects.
Sure. Each project we're assessing and we're figuring out if we can afford it, if it's still viable. I have an excellent center that has been a project that I love. We've fundraised for it and we've got it all figured out. But you know what? We're going to scale it back. I don't need the shade structure that I personally love. The design aesthetic was wonderful, but we're going to have to scale it back, and so that we could put, so that we can change we're not going to change the integrity of the project, but we're going to change some of the bells and whistles so that it's functional and it's effective for my students. It's user friendly for my coaches, but some of the bells and whistles we're just going to have to stop until we're able to really afford it. The stadium is still ongoing. It's going to be, we'll have a certificate of occupancy on July 31st. 1,600 workers are still there, and we're very appreciative. But each project we're assessing on a project by project basis. And some things we've been able to accelerate. Simple things like getting in and painting offices. We hired a wonderful new women's basketball coach during this crisis. Lindy LaRock from Stanford, and she's outstanding. I'm totally biased, but she really is. And so we were able to go in and repaint all the locker rooms because no one can be in the building. And so we thought, let's take advantage of this opportunity. And so there's been a lot of silver linings.
Thank you. Heather, can you speak to that as it relates to your projects, and if they're stopping, if they're going forward, how are you assessing that?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously we all have probably individual, we have big projects going in the middle of things. We have lots of graphics projects. I've looked at so many graphics, but like as soon as the graphics team is ready to, as soon as, you know, in our state, there's been a construction, all construction has been stopped. And unless it's life sustaining. So we have a couple medical school and medical facility construction projects that are still ongoing on campus. But all the projects, again, work up through our university process. And thankfully, we have good relationships on campus. It's all about relationships and understanding, you know, is it an essential? Is it life sustaining? What's the completion percentage of this given project? So we have a couple projects that are, you know, 65% done. Well, let's finish those. And so where do they rank? And then projects, many of our projects do have a donor component as opposed to some of the other campus projects. And so that plays a little bit of a role because people have invested in this and they expect it to move forward. So that's kind of a good thing in the athletics world. But each of those are really measured in totality across campus. Unless your project's 100% funded, you're going to have to fall into the pecking order. But again, we're excited because they just released the construction can start to come back to life here on May 8th. So things will start moving again. But yeah, it's an adjustment. I mean, it really is. It's a you know, and again, it's a communication to your coaches and everybody to understand where things stand as soon as you know that information.
Excellent insight. Thank you, Heather. We're going to pause for a few questions here. This one's from Michael Scarano. If anybody that wants to tackle this one, what is your philosophy relative to prioritizing staff reduction cuts? Tough question. How do you prioritize that if you arrive at that point? I won't call on you, so I don't put you on the spot. Somebody take that one.
I'll go ahead and start. It's like everything else, I truly believe, for whom a lot is given, a lot is expected. And when I look at our staff and I look at our payroll, we have a lot of money. 60% of our budget is either in salaries or scholarships. And then when I look at our salary line item, it's skewed to the high end, between football and basketball and and myself and a few administrators, we're at the high end, and more is going to be expected of that group than the other folks, because, we have the capacity to do it and they don't. So that's where I'm going to start. But we are state employees as well. So we're still waiting from guidance from the state to make some decisions. So we can't just go out and say, we're going to do A, B, and C. They've asked us not to get out ahead of the rest of the system. And so we're waiting to kind of get some direction from them. But that's where we'll start, at the high end.
Anybody else want to chime in? Or, well said.
It was perfectly well said. I mean, he's the veteran for a reason, right?
That's a tough one. Hey, for our participants, just letting you know, we're going to go probably till about 15 after the hour. And it's just so if you had an idea, if you had to make plans for that. Next question comes from Matt Comer. Does anyone see a reduction in the number of games a sport is permitted to play with keeping NCAA minimums in mind? Anybody see that as coming from the national office?
I'll take that. I mean, having served on the NCAA, I'm on the NCAA council, and I know that there is a waiver request in a queue from the group of 5 commissioners, as well as a number of the other 22 conferences, not necessarily from the Power 5, but there's a request to consider some flexibility with regards to the Division I requirements, whether that's the number of Division I opponents they may have, sports sponsorship, which on the council, our last call, that was not met with great support. But some of the other flexibility that we do need to consider for some schools for a period of time, not indefinitely, but during this, I mean, it is probably the greatest economic shock to all of our universities and higher education. I mean, all businesses obviously are taking significant hits, but higher education, our sources of revenue, if you think about it, whether it's enrollment or state appropriations or endowment funding or other sources, are all exposed. And the worst case scenario for higher education is not great. Even when the economy turns on, when you talk to colleagues or board members or things like that, we're going to be in first gear for a little while, for quite a while, frankly. So it is not going to churn like it had for a while. And so I think there will be some flexibility granted by the council. We meet again in May and in June with regards to some of those expectations and requirements.
Thank you, Heather. I'm going to take one more here before I move on to a leadership philosophy. But Heather, I'm going to stay with you just from your experience here on this committee. But then if anybody wants to chime in, great. Are there contingencies regarding student athlete well-being being considered for that second wave of COVID cases after campuses reopen?
You mean contingencies if they wouldn't be able to compete?
That's what I'm gathering from that, is that, if they, just like the spring sports were maybe given another year, or just, will there be some contingencies and some well-being and flexibility? I think if we all feel like, you can open and then we have a second wave that really impacts us again.
Right. Well, with, the spring sport issue was challenging, frankly, and I probably did not go along with the group in many ways, because I feel that the decision was made a little prematurely, because obviously we're all talking about the economic impact of this. And I think we made that decision maybe a little prematurely, because we granted that ability to do that. Now you don't have to do it. And I recognize everybody, it kind of whittled down who's really coming back first spring season. But my greatest concern was we would really start to feel a serious economic impact, number one, and number two, the precedent that that sets for fall sports, should they not go off as we plan. You know, I do not see how we could not grant that kind of, again, flexibility to the fall sports if they didn't have a season of competition this year, given the precedent that was set with spring sports. So, I mean, hopefully not, you know, I mean, I know that we're all praying and hoping that the fall sports, you know, they may have to be delayed, you know, we don't know, but it does go off into some semblance of a season. And, you know, we learn to manage what that looks like in a post-COVID era.
Thanks, Heather. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes. Wanted to ask for each of you could chime in. Is there a skill set during this time that you're just relying on the most, whether it's a strength of yours or you've really had to ramp up a weakness that you may have as a leader? Is there a particular skill that you're just really having to rely on during this time? Bubba, I'll start with you.
I was hoping you wouldn't do that. Well, I think that, Desiree talked about technology. I'm not good on technology. I think I've learned a lot, and I've tried to focus on learning different technology and different skills. I do think that communication is one that I think we've always talked about as being the most important. I think at times we let it slip in various groups, and I think this is another great reminder that your communication skills are incredibly important, whether it's audio, visual, written, it doesn't matter. People want to know what's going on, and the more we can do that, the better off we are. I think some of either Heather or Desiree mentioned it. I think resiliency, gratitude, or other attributes, they may not be skills per se, but I think gratitude and appreciation for what we get to do, who we get to do it with, is something that I think we've reflected on. I think being away from what you like to do allows you some time to really think about what's important for you personally and professionally. And I think that's given us that opportunity to do that. Now, just like everything else, you can experience it for a while. The real benefit is if you can make that a habit and continue it beyond the crisis. And I think that becomes our challenge for each of us.
Thanks, Bubba. Desiree, your thoughts on that?
3 things. Optimism, we need to maintain it, right? We have to. Our people need that, and it ebbs and flows with all of us, but we're going to get through it, and we have to maintain that sense of optimism. Caring, we have to care a little bit more and show that we care just a little bit more for our staff, for our families, for our students, for our coaches. None of us have it all figured out, but if we all do it together, we're going to be just okay. We're going to be not just okay, we're going to be excellent. And then resiliency. We've got to be resilient. And I get fuel. I'm a reader. And so sometimes when I've been on 8 Zoom calls a day, I love my husband and son, but I need to check out, and I go put my headphones in and I go for a run and I listen to Winston Churchill and silent. Anyway, yes, I'm totally nerdy, but that's what I do. I've got to get away from them, and then I can come back and I can be a normal, non-crazy person. So knowing kind of how you get energy and how you recharge is critically important.
Thank you for that, Desiree. Heather, how are you? What's the skill set you're using most, even if strength or weakness? What's the one you're using most? And then maybe close this round of questioning out with how you're keeping the morale up, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, my staff knows I'm really empathetic and patient, and I think being positive. I'm so not. Being positive, just generally outlook on life. The positive things that we see here. We have the live virus here at the University of Pittsburgh. We're studying it. Our researchers are in the epicenter of the research piece. And so there's things to be proud of and to support and help. So we're excited about that. I think when you look at, I have this kind of mantra in the back of my head, what makes a successful organization? And I think about these 5 things a lot. So it's like work ethic, and our team works hard, you know, and I'm like everyone has said, I think we're all seeing that they realize they've got to adapt to their own individual work situations, but work ethic is happening and it's there. You know, talent, intellect, people are working hard and thinking about how to adjust, and the third thing is curiosity. So how do you get better at what you do? And so now how do we change and adapt in this environment? And it's the curiosity piece has got to be really important. Grit is like toughness, the ability to adapt. So when you think about work ethic, intellect, curiosity, grit, is what we're living through. This is a gritty time. Like, you know, no one planned for this. No one plans to, you know, have the opening kickoff run back against you and you're down 7-0 right out of the gate. Like that, life does, you know, sports, as Desiree alluded to, it teaches you how to adapt because things don't go as planned, and this definitely wasn't as planned. And then ultimately is really selflessness. So how do we help others in this time, and how do we help serve our staff and be, you know, just really appreciative for what everybody's going through personally and professionally, and be thankful for the opportunities that we have. And so, you know, overall, you know, I'm just really, I knew they would not shut down my last Starbucks, and they hadn't. So, you know, you got to believe. And so I go in to tip them every day, thank them like crazy. But you got to be optimistic and positive, because that, you know, I think it's contagious, you know, and you're either looking at it as, you know, oh man, it's never going to happen, you know, or it's a positive mentality, and you hope that that spreads to your staff to keep the morale up.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to just differ with Heather for a second, because every time we go to some kind of convention or whatever, she and I always go running, and we always end up at Starbucks at the end. But she has way more empathy than she gives herself credit for. So no, that's not true.
I'm going to sneak this one in for you, Bubba. Thank you for sharing that. And I think the consistent theme there was the communication, whether it's a strength of yours or not. And quite honestly, what I've been seeing is whether you have updates or not, whether you have the younger staff particularly want to hear from us, want to hear from you in the chair. And so, Bubba, let me sneak this one in yet. You mentioned salaries being this comes from a gentleman by the name of Ren Baker. You mentioned salaries being a huge percentage of the budget and the need to have more in reserves. What are your thoughts on the changes that this could bring about in employment contracts?
Well, I do think that the buyouts have been a big talk lately, in that we're one of the schools that are paying a fair amount for someone not to coach. And I think that we do have an imbalance in the relationship between the institution and the coach. And they're so popular that the contracts are tilted much toward the coach. And I think we need to bring that back. And I think this economic reality will give us a chance to talk about those things and say, we can't put ourselves in that type of position going forward. So we'll have to work on the buyouts and figure out a way that we can work together and pay the salary we need to pay to get people to perform. But I think we cannot handicap the school so badly that it hurts your ability to be successful long-term. So I do think that's a challenge for us.
Thanks, Bubba. Well, it's 5:15 Eastern Standard Time. I did see a few other questions. I'll be happy to share those with our panelists. I do want to be respectful of your time and committed to the time that we had set apart. Thank you, panelists. You made this extremely easy. So thank you for volunteering your time. Thank you for sharing with your colleagues. For all of our colleagues and participants on the call today, don't forget the path that CALS is putting on Thursday, May 7th, 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thanks for the opportunity. It was an honor having you serve on the panel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, everyone.
Good job, Eric.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bubba. See you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Good to see you, Desiree.
Nice to see you, Heather.
Yep. Bye-bye,
Okay.
gang. See you, Bubba.
Bye, Bubba.
Good seeing you guys.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Eric.